Hello everyone, or anyone who this video may reach. This is my YouTube channel where I'm going to be documenting my over-the-board chess games, just going over my thoughts and feelings during the game, after the game, for my benefit, but also hoping that anyone watching who's between beginner and intermediate strength, you can pick up some ideas and tips from these videos and implement that in your own game. I probably will play some rapid chess as well online, talk through my thought process, record that and put that on here, and maybe even stream some rapid and blitz chess on TikTok. Who knows? This first video is just a trial, really, so any feedback would be greatly appreciated. And I'm going to start off by reviewing my most recent over the board chess game, which was a club game. We were away to a team called St.Ives. This was last week on Tuesday night. So there's four boards. You put your strongest player on board one, descending down, and I was playing board two with the black pieces. You get a point for a win, half a point for a draw, zero for a loss. And we won 3-1 in this game. We're actually on a run of about 7 or 8 wins in a row now, our club. So, yeah, really good. But anyway, I was playing a gentleman called John, who started off by playing b3. And I have absolutely no prep whatsoever for this move. Never played it, so I'm literally winging it from move one. So I played d5. He played e3, which lets me get the centre with e5. But this is what's known as a hyper modern way of playing how he's playing. It's where you allow your opponent to get the centre, but then you get the compensation in the fact that every time you develop, it comes with a threat. So, for example, he plays bishop b2, threatening this pawn. I play bishop d6. He plays knight f3, attacking this pawn again, and so on. I defended the pawn with knight to c6, but the problem is he's going to pin me, and I know he's going to pin me. So I'm going to have to play queen e7 to defend this pawn again. So it makes more sense to play queen e7 instantly. If you run this game alongside a database, 90% of masters play queen e7 here, so it's the main line. And it makes sense just because it's more flexible. If you know you're going to have to play this move anyway, just play it first because it keeps your options open. And, other options we do have is instead of going knight to c6 and allowing this pin, you can always defend this pawn with knight to d7. And this is an idea to remember. What this does is, if he tries to pin you, you can just kick him, and then he has to retreat back. And then the downside to this move is, once players kind of carry on with their development, this bishop is hemmed in. So you've got to find another home for this knight. It might route to the queen side. It might come over to the king side. So it's more solid, but a bit slower. But I think I prefer this way of playing to what I did, if I'm being honest. I think this is how I would go about it next time. Queen e7, knight d7. But anyway, I played knight to c6, allowed the pin, queen to e7. He strikes at the e5 pawn again with d4. And he now has 1, 2, 3 attackers on e5, and I only have 2 defenders because obviously this knight is currently neutralized. So I've got no more pieces I can defend e5 with. So that means I either have to trade it or push. They're my two options. Trading, in my opinion, just looks really bad because he takes back with a knight. And if you look at his position now, this bishop has opened up. This queen has opened up to this undefended pawn. This knight is now putting more pressure on my already pinned knight. He has 2 attackers, only have 1 defender. So his pieces just get really active if I trade. So for me, that's just a massive no. I pushed on with e4, just, locking this bishop in, taking more space in the centre. He hops in the middle with knight to e5. I just defend my knight again with bishop to d7. But I was looking at queen to g5 during the game, and it actually turns out that this was the best move. And the idea is, I'm obviously threatening this pawn. If he ignores it and just say takes this knight, for example, I take the pawn, and even though he has a discovered check, once he hops out the way, I can just block this bishop. So I'm now attacking his rook and his bishop simultaneously. And if he just moves the rook, obviously he can't castle now. This is good for me, and I can follow up with bishop to d7, putting a pin on this knight. So once this knight moves, I win the bishop as well. And he might defend this pawn by castling. But then a common idea, what you'll see a lot, you can then bring this bishop over to h3. We're threatening checkmate on the spot. The only way he has to defend it is g3, which we win the exchange. If he defends the pawn by playing g3, then this is just really ugly for him. I mean, we have control over this f3 square. If he ever wants to break down my centre, he has to break with f3, but because he's already pushed g3, his king side is just going to get really weak. So yeah, queen g5 would have been a good move, but I just kept it simple. I probably didn't look at that move enough. I just added another defender on my knight with bishop to d7. He made the trade, which I was happy enough. You know, it is nice to keep the bishop pair. The bishop pair is really powerful, but that's more in open positions. This is a locked position. The centre's locked up. So actually, in closed position, knights are stronger than bishops. And particularly that light squared bishop, my pawns are on light squares, and I want to keep my pawns on light squares. So that light squared bishop would have been a bit of a weak piece for me anyway. So yeah, I'm fine with the trade. He plays c4, just trying to dissolve my centre, of course. I figured he would play this, and I played bishop to b4 check. The idea of this move is that I was worried if I just carried on my development, I was worried he was going to play c5, and this bishop was going to get a bit locked in. I thought, will it have much of a future here? But I don't really need to be worried. I don't think c5 is a good move. I mean, later on, once I've got castled, I can always chip away at this pawn and get my bishop out. Sorry, get my bishop out anyway. C5 in general just isn't a good move. I've got the centre, I've got the space in the centre, and he's got the bishop pair, so he wants to open the position. He wants to get this bishop active, and he wants to get rid of my space in the centre. So he should be dissolving the centre really by pushing past. He actually relieves the tension and strengthens my centre. So this move would have just been good for me. So I didn't need to be worried really, but I was worried about the future of this bishop, so I wanted to trade it off. He blocks the bishop, so the idea obviously is he has to block the check with something, and then once he blocks, I'll trade it off. But I was looking actually after I played bishop b4, he doesn't have to block. He's got a tricky little move. He can play king f1. And the idea of this is if I'm not paying attention, if I'm not being careful and I just carry on my development, he plays c5, and now my bishop is locked out, and it's going to get trapped, basically. He's going to play this, bit retreat, this, and he's going to win my bishop. But I was paying attention, so if he played king f1, I would have just retreated my bishop and been happy that he now has to bring his king back out to get his rook out, so I'd have been pleased there. But he doesn't, he blocks. I just carry on my development. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I do think knight to e7 would have been better than knight to f6. It just looks way more flexible. If you go to knight to e7, it's still doing the same job as it was on f6, in the fact that if he captures, I capture back with a knight. But from e7, it also defends this pinned knight, and it also allows me to bolster my centre with f5. So I feel knight e7 would have been a much better option than knight to f6. So I just need to be a bit more considerate when I'm developing my knights about which one's better. If you look with the engine, it doesn't have anything between these two moves. It never really does, but I think from my perspective, I think 97 would have been much nicer. Um, he kicks my bishop, so obviously I have to make the trade. I get castled, and then he plays queen to c2, which I thought was a bit of a slow move. I don't know why he's not just getting his king safe. I'm guessing he wants to just take this pawn and put some pressure down the c file. Um, so I play a6, which I wanted this bishop to declare its intentions before the c file gets opened. But I was a little bit angry myself because I thought, well, hang on a minute. I've just looked at the fact that he's going to take. I'll take back with a queen, keeping my pawns intact, and he now can't take because he's pinned. But it was a bit naive for me, really, because that was all I looked at, and I hadn't considered that actually he can just take this pawn first. And now the problem is what happens is I recapture with my knight as planned, and this knight's a really strong piece here. It can't be kicked by any pawns. It's in the centre of the board, really strong piece. But he's now going to trade, and I'm going to end up with these weak queenside pawns, which is what happened really. Um, So I wasn't too pleased with that. I should have looked at what options he had a bit more than I did. Um, it actually turns out that after this, when I was analysing the game, I saw this idea of this in between move where you actually jump the knight to b4 and you're attacking his queen, he's attacking yours. But obviously, if he takes yours, you take his with a check, and you win the rook for the knight. So that would have been a nice move. Um, I didn't see it until I analysed the game. I never saw this at the time. And if he takes your knight, he doubles his pawns. We take his bishop back with the queen, keeping our pawns intact, but also tempting him to take this pawn. I don't think my opponent would have took this pawn. He was a strong player. He was rated just over 1800, so he's a strong player. And we're cutting him off from castling here, but also if he takes this pawn, it's just suicide because we're going to bring the rook to this open file. If he brings his queen over to this side of the board, it's game over because I infiltrate with the rook and we're threatening checkmate on the spot and he can't defend it because he needs to come to the light squares, which he can't. My pawn's covering this one, knight covering this one. Um, and if he comes over to this side of the board where he keeps his queen safe, I just infiltrate with the queen instead. I'm still cutting him off from castling. I'm threatening this pawn. This rook's coming in later. It's just suicide for him to take that pawn. He can't do it. So this knight to b4 move would have been really good. But I didn't see it, unfortunately. We did go down the line of takes, 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 takes. And he wins this pawn at the end of the line. So he's now a pawn up, and I've got these weak queenside pawns. So I was pretty unhappy in this position, but I knew I would get a bit of counterplay because this rook's going to come out of tempo. This rook's going to come out of tempo. I'm going to get some counterplay. And what's already going through my mind is actually sacrificing this knight because his king's still in the middle. And whenever your opponent's king is still in the middle, there's always tactics if you're well developed. I played rook to e8. He went queen f3, rook to b8. He came back here to defend this pawn. And now he's on a square with this knight attacks. I thought I'm definitely sacrificing it. So I played knight to take e3 straight away. Listen, I don't know if this was actually good at the time I did it. It turns out it is the best move. But at the time, I just looked at the position and thought, if I allow him to castle, we're just going to go into an endgame where he's a pawn up. I've got these weak pawns. He's got the open file looking at these weak pawns. It's just going to be horrible for me. I've got to do something. I would rather take the risk and go out swinging than go down in a slow, torturous way like this. So I played knight takes, and the only way White keeps an equal position here is he has to take back. Then after this check, he has to find king to f2, which would be really hard to find. The idea is that I can't throw any more checks in. So if he goes king to f1, for example, I get this check in. He goes here. This rook's completely out of the game. This rook's coming in as well. Yeah, I've just got a really good position. If he goes this way, again, I can bring the rook in this way. I can bring the rook in this way. So either way, I make a battery of my rook, whether it's along the third rank or the b file, and then I get my queen over to the light squares, and his king's in the middle. He's in massive trouble. Like I say, he has to find this king f2 move, which I think would be really difficult to find, to be honest. And then I'm probably just taking here with tempo on this. My queen's coming in. It would, but the engine says it's an equal position. But what actually happened in the game was I played knight takes e3, and I got up and I walked away from the board, and I came back 10 minutes later, and he was like, his eyes were looking everywhere, and he was shaking his head, and I walked away again. I thought, okay, this is perfect. I've got him flustered. He's worried. He's trying to calculate everything. This is exactly what I wanted. A massive psychological impact. And turns out it flustered him that much that when I came back to the board, he actually just played king to d2 and just literally hung his queen. An 1800 player just hung his queen. But listen, I guess that's what happens when when you get flustered and when you play over the board, you can get flustered really easy. Things look really scary, and psychologically, it has a massive effect. So I just took this queen. He realised what he'd done, resigned on the spot, and yeah, I was really pleased. He's a couple hundred elo stronger than me, so I'm really happy with that result. Um, and I've got a tournament coming up next weekend, Cambridgeshire County Championship, where I've got 3 games on the Saturday, 2 on the Sunday. So I'll have some good content for my channel and hopefully gain some more elo and do well. Thanks for anyone who watched. Like I say, any feedback would be appreciated. Thank you. Goodbye.